I felt safer living in the biggest favela of Brazil than in my own hometown. Let me explain. In 2018, I ended up living in the biggest favela of Brazil, Rocinha, in the south of Rio. I stayed there unplanned for a total of 8 months, and although it's been such a long time ago, I still think about it quite often. Most people who've ever been to Brazil or Rio will get hit by a little saudade at some point, and obviously I'm no exception to that. We all love parties, beaches, and caipirinhas. If you're Brazilian, don't worry, this is not going to be another gringa glamorizing poverty and crime. I just really want to share my honest experience living there as a 23-year-old. Let me give you some context first. I didn't plan on living there at all. I had just finished a long-distance cycling trip from Belgium to the side of Spain, and when I returned back home to Belgium in rainy November, I wasn't feeling my best mentally. To solve that problem, I very impulsively booked a trip to Brazil to turn those travel blues into good vibes. I had been there twice before, so I was convinced it was a good idea. Quick note, I wouldn't recommend doing that because your problems will return after a few months and hit you 3 times as hard. But it's easier to deal with because at least you're walking under palm trees in a little bikini, so it's up to you. I wanted to stay in Rio for 3 months until my visa would expire, learn Portuguese, and live as much as a local as I could. Why? I was young, free, floating around, very lost, and I didn't know what else to do. One night, on one of those daily street parties, I met a guy who was from Rocinha, which at the time was the biggest favela of Brazil. I believe now it's Sol Nascente, it's not Rocinha anymore. I had only heard about it from the news and locals telling me to stay away from there. It is so big that it's basically a city within a city fully operating on its own. I had seen documentaries about it, movies. It's a place that was mostly known for crime, drugs, and murder. I had zero interest in going there. There was just no reason for me to be there. The problem was I had to leave my Airbnb that I only booked for 2 weeks in Ipanema. It was high season, I couldn't find anything else, everything was fully booked or so expensive for me. And so the random guy at the street party suggested to come live with him in the favela and split the costs. Just so you know, he was a complete stranger with no shirts and a little cauliflower ear from fighting, and I was living with the I know it's a bad idea, but I really want to know what's going to happen next mindset. So, of course, I said yes. Fast forward, we're moving in. My previous Airbnb hosts from Ipanema were so worried that I was going to live in Rocinha that they even offered me a place in their office space. That is not a reassuring start. On the first day, I remember sitting in the truck with the guy who was helping us move. We're driving up the hill of the favela, and I was just silently taking everything in. It was all new to me. I had no idea what to expect. It's not like other countries or places where you know you're gonna get a culture shock because you've heard other people talking about it, but this was completely new. I had no idea what a favela looked like from the inside out. I didn't know what a favela would feel like from the inside out. As we were driving up the hill, I could hear funk in the background without even knowing yet what these sounds were. I was smelling smoky meat from all the barbecues. There was so much going on around me, so many colors. The sun was burning on my skin, and I remember really loving all the chaos and everything that was going on. By the way, I barely have pictures or videos from my time in the favela because it's not allowed to film in some areas, in quite a lot of areas, and also I didn't feel comfortable taking pictures of strangers. It's not my place, I'm not a photographer, so you won't see some beautiful documentary style photos. Our house was quite high up, so to get there, you could take a motor taxi or you could just walk up and down for 30 or 40 minutes. It was very easy. The motor taxis were right in front of the house, but the problem was next to the motor taxis were a group of drug traffickers. I had never seen drug traffickers in my life, and I didn't really know what to expect from them. The guy I was living with had told me to not be scared of them at all, but also to not look them in the eye. They are spread around the favela. Basically, these are young guys wearing gold keychains, long swimming shorts, flip-flops, and AK-47s and other machine guns. And as a young woman, walking past a group of guys is always uncomfortable anywhere, but walking past a group of guys with heavy weapons as accessories was another thing. So I decided not to take a motor taxi and just walk downstairs. I remember being really nervous, and it took me 1 hour to find the courage to actually just leave the house and walk down. I'm walking very silently, trying not to stand out, although I was the only one there. And I knew they knew I wasn't from there because they had never seen me before. A few seconds passed by, that felt like a few minutes. And suddenly I can't see them anymore because they are on my right. I kind of passed them already a little bit. I was expecting them to shout something, whistle, or harass me in some kind of way because that's just what always had happened to me. And then nothing happened. They didn't even look at me, they didn't whistle, they didn't shout, they didn't do anything. It was so weird to me because it was the first time in my life where a group of guys didn't try to intimidate me while walking past them. It was so weird. From that moment, I knew I liked that place. When I say it like this, it might sound like I'm convinced the world revolves around me, but when you're so used to catcalling and harassment, it's very strange to suddenly not have that anymore. Living in the favela made me think a lot about safety, what safety actually means and how it is different for everyone. There's also a big difference between feeling unsafe and being unsafe. And the definition of safety will be different depending on your gender, race, age. For example, me as a woman, in my home country, Belgium, I have a much lower chance of getting in trouble, getting in a dangerous situation or getting killed. Yet, me and a lot of other women, young women especially, don't feel safe because we get harassed all the fucking time. And I'm someone who's not easily scared, but it's just so exhausting and tiring to get sexually harassed. It makes you so aware of every movement and it takes away all your freedom. Whereas in the favela, statistically, I have a much higher risk of dying from ending up in a shooting. Yet I felt safe because I was not getting sexually harassed all the time and I could just walk in a bikini all day long. And it's such a mindfuck and so contradictory because there are people with guns walking around. There are shootings daily, there are gang wars happening. You get messages on WhatsApp with pictures of dead bodies that just got slaughtered by gang members. There is the police that aggressively stops you with 4 machine guns towards your face to check for drugs. I even had to flee my own home because the special forces were gonna start a shooting in my streets in the middle of the night. And that's crazy and also so interesting that so many new dangers and risks entered my life. But my mind and body was just so comfortable because that one aspect, the sexual harassment, disappeared. It made me realize how much sexual harassment actually affected me all my life. And it felt so freeing to finally end up in a place where that just didn't happen. It was the first time ever that I experienced something like this, that I could just walk around and not have to deal with that. After a few weeks of living in the favela, I knew my way and I would often go to parties in the center of Rio or in other places of the city. I would get harassed there quite often and I would get in trouble from time to time. So when arriving back at the entrance of the favela at the end of the night or in the early morning, I really felt safe, which is crazy. There is a reason for this, obviously. There are certain rules in the favela, or at least in some. You can't harass people, you can't steal, you can't murder, you know, the usual stuff. If you break these rules, the consequences are just a lot bigger. You might get severely punished or killed. So logically, people don't do that. People just follow the rules and just mind their own business. So if you don't do anything weird in a favela, there's no reason to be scared. So you have the big boss of the favela who is in charge, and then you have the drug traffickers who kind of manage everything. This is very simplified. There are certain things you might get away with in the big city because the government is just so slow, but the favelas just operate on their own, and so they don't expect any help from the government in no way. Another really important aspect is that a favela is a community. That's also how they call themselves. These are people who grew up together, they're from the same background, they face very similar struggles like discrimination, racism, poverty, so there is no reason to betray one another or to do each other harm. I forgot my wallet in a bar one day. It was at the big entrance of the favela with a lot of people. And 1 hour later, I just go back to see if it's still there, and it was. People were sitting at the table and they just handed it to me. Actually, one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video is because I have been seeing a lot of favela content lately on TikTok. You know, tourists going on favela tours, obsessing over Brazilian funk, rightly so, and kind of glamorizing life up in the hills. After one day trip, gringos will come up with the conclusion that the favela is safe after all, because, you know, they could go up without any problems. And I know that they're saying this with the best intentions. They're trying to destigmatize these places, humanize these places, but they also, just like me, look at safety from a Western point of view. For us, tourists, safety means not getting robbed, not getting beaten up for money, and so on. But it's very different if you are born there and you're just trying to get through the day. For example, in 2017, 1 year before I went to the favela, there was a really long war between police and gang members. There were daily shootings, it took a few months, and a lot of people died. The government tried to implement more police in these areas. So imagine just trying to go to work or school, but everything is closed off. You might die from a shooting, but you don't know. So it's very different if you are living there. It's also really funny how tourists are so drawn to favelas and other dangerous places, and me included. I think it's because our lives in our own countries are so boring that we're trying to look for adventure and good stories to tell. But I have never heard a Brazilian say that a favela is safe. A lot of these people have had bad experiences as well. And so we as tourists, as gringos, we only see a fraction of what it's like. It's the same as tourists go to your country or your city and they glamorize an aspect of your place that actually causes harm or something that you don't even like. Another thing you shouldn't forget is that most tourists go to pacified favelas. These are a lot more accessible for tourists. They have bars and hostels even. If you would go to the north of Rio, you would have a very different experience. Another risk in favelas that people don't really talk about has nothing to do with crime. It's actually landslides from climate change. Whether you believe in it or not, in the last few years there have been insane floodings where a lot of people lost their homes, where a lot of people drowned. It happens more and more often, and it's an issue that gets overlooked. Conclusion, I'm not saying the favela is safe because you can be at the wrong place, wrong time and get hit by a lost bullet. This actually happened to my friends when I had already left. He's fine, he's alive, but he got shot. But I just started looking at safety very differently after living in Rocinha. It made me realize that my definition of safety might not be the only one and might not be the right one. On all my solo travels, the question I get asked the most is it safe for women? Is it safe for me as a black person? Is it safe for me as a queer person? Is it safe for me as someone who follows a specific religion? It's very personal and I don't know the answer. So, is a favela safe? For you maybe, for me maybe, but we should never minimize the daily struggles and challenges that locals face every day just because we happen to feel comfortable. Obviously, I could talk a lot more about favelas, traveling as a woman, safety, and so on, but I'm just gonna wrap it up. If you made it this far, your attention span is great, and I would love to know what safety means for you, so let me know in the comments.